People think empires collapse because of bullets or betrayal. They don't. Sometimes they collapse because one exhausted girl closes her eyes for 11 minutes. Red warning lights painted the 23rd floor war room like a crime scene. Every monitor flashed with error messages, security breaches, and frozen banking transactions while Manhattan drowned beneath freezing November rain outside the glass walls. The entire floor smelled like burnt coffee, overheated servers, and panic. I barely noticed any of it anymore. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling so badly I kept missing keys I'd typed 1,000 times before. 48 hours without real sleep does strange things to your body. Your vision blurs at the edges. Your heartbeat starts feeling borrowed. Even breathing becomes something you have to remember manually. The cybersecurity dashboard in front of me pulsed crimson again. Another attack attempt blocked. Another wave stopped seconds before impact. Whoever was behind this wanted access to Moretti Global's financial network badly enough to keep hammering the system every 3 minutes for 2 straight days. Around me, the war room had emptied hours ago. Senior engineers had gone home. Executives stopped answering calls sometime after midnight. Even the overnight analysts disappeared one by one until the only sounds left were rain striking the windows and the endless clicking of my keyboard. I rubbed my burning eyes and forced myself to focus on the stream of code crawling across my screen. One mistake. That's all it would take. One missed line. One delayed patch. One firewall failure. Then half the city's accounts would lock permanently by sunrise. My stomach twisted from too much caffeine and not enough food. There were 3 empty energy drink cans beside my monitor and a protein bar still unopened because my hands had been shaking too hard to unwrap it earlier. Somewhere down the hall, a clock chimed 3 times. 3 a.m. I whispered a curse under my breath and typed faster. The attackers were adapting now. Learning. Evolving every hour. Whoever they weren't amateurs sitting in a basement somewhere. This was organized. Coordinated. Professional. My screen suddenly glitched black for half a second before new warning messages exploded across the dashboard. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Core banking firewall compromised. I straightened instantly, exhaustion forgotten. No. My voice cracked from dehydration as I launched the emergency containment script manually. Lines of code flooded the monitor while my pulse slammed painfully against my ribs. If this failed, billions of dollars could disappear before dawn. My fingers flew across the keyboard until they cramped hard enough to force me to stop. Just 10 seconds, I told myself. 10 seconds to close my eyes. 10 seconds to breathe. I leaned back carefully in the chair while cold blue light flickered across the ceiling above me. Rain hammered against the windows harder now, loud enough to sound like static. Somewhere far below, Manhattan traffic hissed through flooded streets. My body gave out before my mind did. The next thing I heard was the violent crack of something slamming against the conference table. I jerked awake so fast pain shot down my neck. Every monitor around me still flashed red. Every alarm still screamed. And standing across the war room beneath the bleeding emergency lights was Adrian Moretti himself. Dark charcoal suit. Rain still dripping from his coat sleeves. Ice blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass. The entire room seemed colder when he walked in. He stared at me for one long second, his expression unreadable except for the fury tightening his jaw. Then his gaze dropped to the security dashboard behind me. Millions in frozen transactions. Server instability warnings. Citywide outage risks. His voice came low and controlled, the kind that scared people more than shouting ever could. You fell asleep. I pushed myself upright too quickly, dizziness crashing over me. Mr. Moretti, I can explain, while my company was under attack. His eyes hardened. While my people were losing millions by the minute. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Because suddenly I realized something horrifying. He had no idea I'd been here alone the entire time. Adrian stepped closer, polished shoes echoing across the silent floor. "If you can sleep while my empire burns," he said coldly, "you're useless to me." The words landed harder than exhaustion ever could. Around us, the warning lights continued flashing red across the walls like a heartbeat moments from stopping. Then Adrian reached for my security badge clipped beside the keyboard and ripped it free in one clean motion. "You're fired, Claire." The badge hit the desk beside me with a sharp plastic crack that somehow sounded louder than every alarm in the room combined. Nobody spoke. The few overnight analysts still hiding near the back wall suddenly became very interested in their monitors. One of them looked at me with pity. Another looked relieved it was not them. I swallowed hard and forced my shaking hands to stay still. That was the humiliating part about exhaustion. It stripped away dignity first. Adrian Moretti stood motionless beneath the red emergency lights while rain streaked down the windows behind him in silver rivers. Up close, he looked even more dangerous than the stories said. Not because he raised his voice. Because he never needed to. Men like him controlled rooms by existing inside them. "Security will escort you downstairs," he said flatly. I stared at the security badge lying beside my keyboard. 48 straight hours. 48 hours fighting off attacks from people I never saw. 48 hours keeping his empire alive while executives disappeared into penthouses and hotel suites. And somehow the only thing Adrian had noticed was 11 minutes of sleep. My throat burned, but I refused to let myself cry here. Not in front of him. Not in front of these people. "Understood," I whispered. Adrian's expression did not change. Maybe that hurt more than the firing itself. He did not look angry anymore. He looked disappointed. Like I had personally failed him. I reached slowly for my backpack beneath the desk. The movement sent dizziness crashing over me so hard I had to steady myself against the table edge. Nobody moved to help. The giant security dashboard behind me flashed another warning across the screen. Unauthorized intrusion attempt detected. Core servers unstable. My eyes locked onto the code automatically. Instinct. Habit. Obsession. I could already see the flaw forming in the firewall response time. They were adapting faster now. If nobody manually rerouted the packet filters within the next 30 minutes, the attackers would hit the banking cluster directly. My mouth opened before I could stop myself. The East server array needs a manual quarantine update every 7 minutes or you are no longer employed here, Adrian interrupted coldly. Silence swallowed the room again. I nodded once. Right. My voice barely sounded human anymore. I slipped my laptop charger into my bag with numb fingers while the overhead lights flickered violently for half a second. Somewhere downstairs in the building, people shouted. The citywide outage was spreading. Nobody here understood how bad this was about to become. Adrian certainly did not. He stood there in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit looking like a man carved from expensive stone while the system behind him quietly bled to death. For one reckless second, anger cut through my exhaustion sharp enough to wake me fully. Not because he fired me. Because he never once asked why I stayed. I pulled my coat on slowly. The fabric still smelled faintly like burnt coffee from yesterday morning. Or maybe 2 mornings ago. Time had stopped feeling real sometime around hour 36. One of the younger analysts finally spoke up from across the room. Claire, his voice cracked nervously. Maybe you should tell him about the attack patterns. Adrian turned his head slightly toward him. That single glance shut the entire room down instantly. Fear worked fast around powerful men. I slid the backpack over my shoulder and nearly stumbled from the sudden weight. My muscles screamed in protest. I had not stood properly in almost 2 days. Adrian noticed the stumble. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. But he still said nothing. Outside the glass walls, lightning flashed above Manhattan, illuminating the skyline in cold white bursts. The city looked exhausted too. I walked toward the exit on trembling legs while alarms continued screaming behind me. Halfway to the door, I stopped. Not because I wanted to defend myself anymore. I was simply too tired to pretend this did not matter. Without turning around, I said quietly, when the banking cluster crashes, do not reboot the primary servers. If you do, the backup ledger will corrupt too. A long silence followed. Then Adrian's calm voice cut through the room again. Leave your company phone on the desk and walk away, Miss Bennett. The words should not have hurt after everything else. Somehow they still did. I placed the phone beside my empty coffee cups and walked out while the empire behind me continued burning. The elevator ride down from the 23rd floor felt longer than the last 48 hours combined. Every fluorescent light above me buzzed softly, drilling straight into my skull. I leaned against the mirrored wall and watched my own reflection sway slightly with the movement of the elevator. Pale skin. Bloodshot eyes. Dark circles deep enough to look bruised. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me anymore. The silver numbers above the doors ticked downward slowly while my heartbeat dragged unevenly inside my chest. 22. 21. 20. Somewhere above me, Moretti Global was still under attack. Somewhere above me, nobody knew the next breach had already started. The elevator reached the lobby with a soft chime. Warm air rushed toward me carrying the scent of expensive cologne, wet marble, and fresh coffee from the night concierge station. Security guards near the front entrance glanced at me briefly before looking away again. Nobody stopped me. Nobody cared enough to. Outside, freezing rain slammed against the streets hard enough to blur the city lights into streaks of gold and white. Manhattan looked exhausted. Taxis hissed through flooded intersections while distant sirens echoed somewhere uptown. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and stepped into the storm. My phone vibrated weakly in my pocket. Personal phone. Not the company one. The screen lit up with a security alert the second I unlocked it. Eastern firewall failure detected. My stomach dropped instantly. Too early. They were moving faster than I predicted. I stopped beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy. And opened the emergency monitoring app one had secretly mirrored onto my personal device weeks ago. Streams of red warnings flooded the screen so quickly they became unreadable. Banking cluster instability. Transaction corruption detected. Remote intrusion spreading. No, my voice disappeared beneath the rain. Across the street, giant digital billboards flickered violently before going black one by one. A man exiting a taxi cursed loudly when his phone payment failed. Somewhere downtown, another siren started screaming. The attack had reached public infrastructure now. Back on the 23rd floor, chaos erupted less than 20 minutes after I walked out. Adrian Moretti stood motionless at the center of the war room while analysts shouted over one another around him. Every screen flashed critical failure warnings in angry red waves. Why are the quarantines failing? Someone yelled. Because the packet filters keep resetting, another answered. The backup ledger is corrupting. A younger engineer turned pale as he stared at his monitor. Sir, someone disabled the automated containment scripts. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. Who had access? Silence. Then quietly, almost fearfully, the analyst answered. Claire Bennett. Another warning exploded across the main display. Core financial network compromised. Transaction freezes spreading citywide. Adrian's jaw tightened hard enough to sharpen the scar near his temple. Fix it. Nobody moved. Not because they refused. Because nobody knew how. One senior engineer finally swallowed hard and whispered the thing nobody wanted to admit. She built most of the containment architecture herself. Adrian slowly turned toward him. What does that mean? The engineer hesitated before answering. It means she was manually keeping the system alive. The room fell silent except for alarms and rain hammering the windows. Another analyst pulled up the server logs with shaking hands. Oh my God. Adrian stepped closer to the monitor. Endless activity reports filled the screen. Manual firewall reroutes every 7 minutes. Emergency patch deployments. Real-time encryption repairs. Timestamp after timestamp after. Timestamp. 48 straight hours. No breaks longer than 11 minutes. One line near the bottom made the entire room go still. User active, Claire Bennett. Status, last defense layer. Adrian stared at the words without blinking. Behind him, Manhattan's financial network continued collapsing in real time. Then another analyst opened the security footage from the war room cameras. The first clip showed Claire alone beneath red emergency lights typing with trembling hands at 3 in the morning. The second showed her wrapping a shaking wrist with gauze before continuing to work. The third showed her quietly crying after another failed containment attempt while the rest of the office remained empty behind her. Nobody spoke. Adrian watched every second in absolute silence. Then the final clip appeared on screen. Claire asleep at her desk for exactly 11 minutes before jerking awake to another system warning. The timestamp below the footage read 2:49 a.m. Adrian looked at the frozen image of her exhausted face while the city outside his windows slowly shut down around him. And for the first time that night, the most feared man in the room looked like he had made a terrible mistake. Rainwater soaked through my sneakers within minutes, but I barely felt it anymore. My body had moved beyond normal exhaustion into something colder and heavier. The kind that settled behind your ribs and made every breath feel delayed. I stood beneath the flickering pharmacy awning staring at the security alerts flooding my phone while Manhattan slowly unraveled around me. Traffic lights blinked out one intersection at a time. Storefront payment systems crashed. People stepped out of restaurants holding dead credit cards and confused expressions. They thought this was a temporary outage. A bad storm. Nobody understood an invisible war was happening underneath the city. Another warning flashed across my screen. Primary ledger failure imminent. My stomach twisted instantly. No, Adrian, I whispered before catching myself. He was not my problem anymore. Neither was his company. Neither was the empire currently collapsing 3 blocks behind me. I should have walked away then. Gone. Home. Slept for 12 straight hours. Pretended none of this had ever happened. Instead, my hands opened the monitoring dashboard again automatically. Because some people do not know how to stop caring even after they are broken by it. Back inside Moretti Global, panic spread faster than the cyber attack itself. Analysts rushed between workstations carrying tablets and backup drives while emergency alerts painted the entire war room blood red. The giant financial display at the center showed transaction failures climbing by the second. Millions. Tens of millions. More. Adrian Moretti stood completely still in the middle of the chaos while another security clip played silently across the main monitor. Claire at 4:12 in the morning with her head lowered against one hand while she typed with the other. Claire standing beside the server racks drinking electrolyte packets mixed into stale coffee because she was too tired to walk downstairs. Claire quietly removing her glasses and pressing shaking fingers against swollen eyes before forcing herself back to work. One of the executives shifted uncomfortably beside Adrian. Sir, Adrian did not look away from the screen. How long? The executive swallowed hard. 48 hours active inside the system. Almost no downtime. Another analyst pulled up the biometric workstation logs. Her heart rate spiked repeatedly after hour 30. Somebody else whispered, Jesus Christ. Adrian's jaw tightened. The room around him continued moving, shouting, scrambling, but he heard almost none of it anymore. His attention stayed fixed on the frozen image of Claire asleep at her desk beneath flashing emergency lights. 11 minutes. He fired her over 11 minutes after she spent 2 days holding his company together alone. One of the younger engineers cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, there is something else." Adrian finally turned. "What?" The engineer hesitated before opening another system file. "The containment architecture everybody uses." He pointed weakly toward the screens. "She designed most of it 6 months ago." Silence. "And nobody else understands it completely." Another system alarm exploded through the room. "Core banking breach detected. Transaction corruption spreading." Adrian snapped back to the present instantly. "Can you stop it?" Nobody answered. That silence told him everything. Across town, I slowly lowered myself onto a cold bus bench beneath the shelter station because my legs finally refused to hold me upright anymore. My hands shook violently as I tried rerouting another firewall sequence remotely through my phone. The screen kept blurring. I blinked hard and tasted blood where I had bitten the inside of my cheek trying to stay awake. Around me, soaked strangers complained about dead banking apps and frozen subway systems while buses ran late through the storm. Nobody noticed the exhausted woman quietly trying to keep the city online from a cracked phone screen. My vision swam again. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, breathing slowly through the dizziness. The attackers had changed tactics. They were targeting the recovery backups now. Smart. Ruthless. Coordinated. Whoever led them understood Moretti Global from the inside. My phone suddenly vibrated with an incoming private number. I stared at it for 2 full seconds before answering weakly. "Hello." Silence greeted me first. Then Adrian Moretti's low voice finally came through the speaker quieter than I had ever heard it before. "Claire." Rain hammered the bus shelter roof above me while traffic lights flickered black across the avenue. I closed my eyes slowly because somehow hearing his voice hurt worse than being fired ever did. Then Adrian said the one thing I never expected from a man like him. I was wrong. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Rain pounded against the plastic bus shelter hard enough to drown out half the city, but Adrian Moretti's voice still reached me clearly through the phone pressed against my ear. Low. Controlled. Different now. Not cold this time. Tired. I was wrong. The word settled strangely inside my chest because men like Adrian did not apologize. They replaced people. They erased mistakes. They moved forward without looking back. I stared down at my shaking hands while streams of red warnings continued crawling across my phone screen. Somewhere downtown. Another power grid flickered offline. Sirens echoed through the wet Manhattan streets like distant alarms from a sinking ship. "Claire," Adrian said again quietly. "Tell me how to stop this." I laughed once before I could stop myself. Not because anything was funny. Because exhaustion had burned through every other emotion hours ago. "Now you want my help." My voice sounded thin and rough even to me. Across the line, silence stretched for 2 seconds too long. Then Adrian answered honestly. "I needed it before. I was too blind to see it. That hurt more than anger would have." I leaned back against the freezing glass panel behind the bus bench and closed my eyes briefly. Everything inside my body felt delayed. My pulse. My thoughts. Even gravity. "The backup ledgers are already infected," I whispered. "If your team reboots the primary servers, the corruption spreads permanently." I heard movement on his end. Voices shouting. Keyboards clattering. Adrian repeating my instructions sharply to someone nearby. The entire empire suddenly listening to the woman they ignored for 2 straight days. Another alert flashed across my phone. Then another. Then the screen froze completely before restarting itself. My stomach dropped instantly. "No, what is it?" Adrian asked immediately. I sat forward slowly, forcing my blurry vision to focus. The mirrored monitoring app one built secretly into the system had just been discovered. Someone on the inside was tracing my remote access point. Cold spread through my chest unrelated to the rain. They found me. Adrian's voice hardened instantly. Who? The attackers. My heartbeat sped painfully. Somebody inside your network is feeding them system responses. They just traced my shadow connection. Across the avenue, a black SUV slowed briefly beside the curb before continuing through the flooded intersection. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe exhaustion was making me paranoid. But survival instincts exist for a reason. I stood too quickly from the bench and the world tilted violently sideways. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. Claire. Adrian's voice sharpened through the phone. Where are you? Does not matter. I forced myself toward the subway entrance across the street while cold rain soaked through my coat completely. Listen carefully. There is a hidden kill switch buried inside the Eastern firewall architecture. Only you can access it. Yes. Silence. Then quietly, Adrian asked the question that mattered. Can you still stop this? I looked down the dark subway stairs where exhausted commuters shuffled beneath flickering fluorescent lights, unaware that half the city's financial systems were collapsing above them. My vision blurred again so badly I had to grip the railing to steady myself. 48 hours without sleep. Too much caffeine. Too much adrenaline. Not enough oxygen. My body was shutting down one system at a time. I think so, I whispered honestly. Claire. His voice stopped me halfway down the stairs. You should have told me you were drowning. Something inside my chest cracked softly at that sentence because I had been telling him for 2 years. Just not with words men like Adrian ever listened to. Through overtime requests. Through skipped vacations. Through sleeping beside glowing monitors while executives went home to luxury apartments. Some people scream for help quietly. I opened my mouth to answer him, but a wave of dizziness crashed through me so suddenly my grip slipped from the railing. The phone fell from my hand and clattered down 2 concrete steps. Commuters turned sharply as I collapsed hard against the wall beside the stairwell, my vision tunneling into black around the edges. Somewhere far away, I could still hear Adrian's voice shouting my name through the fallen phone speaker while the city lights above Manhattan flickered one more time before half the block went dark. The last thing I heard before everything disappeared was Adrian Moretti shouting my name like it actually mattered. Then the world dissolved into noise and cold concrete. Voices blurred together somewhere above me. Footsteps. Subway brakes screaming against wet tracks. Somebody saying, "Call 911." Another voice closer this time. Younger. Frightened. Miss? Miss, can you hear me? I tried to answer, but my body no longer belonged to me. Darkness pressed heavy against my eyes while distant station announcements echoed through the underground tunnels like sounds underwater. Then nothing. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Bright white lights first. The sharp antiseptic smell of a hospital room. Soft beeping from monitors somewhere nearby. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. I forced them open anyway and immediately regretted it when pain shot through my skull. The ceiling above me blurred in and out of focus. Hospital. Somehow that realization felt annoying more than alarming. A nurse adjusted something beside my bed and noticed my eyes opening. Relief crossed her face instantly. "Easy," she said gently. "You scared everybody pretty badly." My throat burned dry when I tried speaking. "How long?" "About 3 hours." 3 hours. Panic hit me harder than the exhaustion ever had. I jerked upright too quickly and the heart monitor beside me spiked wildly in protest. My phone. The nurse pressed a steady hand against my shoulder. You are not touching a computer, a phone, or anything with a screen for at least tonight. You do not understand. My voice cracked hard enough to embarrass me. The system can survive one night, another voice interrupted quietly from the shadows near the window. My entire body froze. Adrian Moretti stood beside the rain-covered glass with his suit jacket removed and sleeves rolled slightly above his wrists. He looked different somehow. Less untouchable. The sharp perfection was still there, but exhaustion had finally reached him too. Dark shadows sat beneath his ice-blue eyes, and his tie hung loosened for the first time since I met him. Outside the hospital windows, Manhattan still flickered unevenly beneath the storm. Adrian stepped closer slowly while the nurse glanced nervously between us before quietly leaving the room. The second we were alone, silence settled heavily into the space. Neither of us knew what to do with it. I looked away first. You should not be here. Adrian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. I disagree. I stared at the thin hospital blanket covering my legs because looking directly at him suddenly felt dangerous in a completely different way than before. Your company is collapsing. Not anymore. That made me look up. Adrian moved closer to the bed and lowered a tablet carefully onto the side table beside me. Your instructions worked. I blinked slowly. The backup ledgers stabilized. His voice softened slightly. The eastern firewall held after the reroute. Relief hit me so hard my eyes burned unexpectedly. For the first time in almost 2 days, the city was breathing again. I leaned back weakly against the pillows while the heart monitor steadied beside me. Adrian watched me quietly for several seconds before speaking again. The doctors said you pushed your body past severe exhaustion. I gave a tired laugh. Occupational hazard. He did not smile back. Claire. The way he said my name this time felt entirely different from the cold voice that fired me hours earlier. Slower now. Careful. You collapsed alone in a subway station after saving my company. I swallowed hard. Your company. Adrian stepped even closer until the city lights reflected sharply across his pale eyes. No, he said quietly. Mine would have died hours ago. Something dangerous shifted in the room after that sentence. Not romance. Not tension. Recognition. The terrifying moment when somebody powerful finally sees exactly how much you carried for them in silence. I looked down at my bruised hands resting against the blanket. Tiny cuts still marked my knuckles from hours of typing against overheated keys. Adrian noticed them instantly. His expression darkened with something that looked painfully close to guilt. Nobody helped you, he said softly. It was not a question. I stared at the rain sliding down the hospital windows behind him. Everybody was busy protecting themselves. Adrian went completely still after that. Then quietly, almost like a confession, he said, I thought I was protecting my empire. My chest tightened unexpectedly. And now? Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face in cold silver for one brief second. Now I think I almost destroyed the person holding it together. Hospitals at night always felt suspended outside normal time. The hallways stayed too bright. The air smelled too clean. And every sound seemed sharper after midnight. Footsteps. Monitor beeps. Rain tapping softly against glass 30 floors above Manhattan traffic. I sat upright in the hospital bed staring at the storm outside while exhaustion settled into my bones like wet cement. Adrian had not left. That was the unsettling part. Men like him did not wait beside hospital beds at 3 in the morning. They delegated. They disappeared into meetings and security briefings and expensive offices overlooking the city. But every time I glanced toward the window, he was still there in the same chair beside the glass, sleeves rolled up, one hand resting against his jaw while he read through security reports on a tablet balanced across his knee. The room glowed blue from the screen light reflecting across his face. Somehow he looked more dangerous, tired than rested. More human too. I hated noticing that. A nurse entered quietly carrying another 4-bag and paused slightly when she realized Adrian Moretti himself was sitting inside the room like a silent bodyguard. Even exhausted, his presence changed the atmosphere around him. People lowered their voices instinctively near men with that much power. "You should try sleeping," the nurse told me gently while adjusting the monitor leads against my chest. I almost laughed. I forgot how. Adrian looked up briefly at that sentence. His expression tightened for half a second before he returned to the tablet. The nurse eventually left us alone again. Silence stretched comfortably for a while after that. Not awkward anymore. Just heavy. Outside, lightning flickered somewhere over the East River. Adrian finally lowered the tablet onto the side table and leaned back slightly in his chair. "There is something I need to tell you." I stared down at the hospital blanket gathered around my hands. That usually means bad news. One of the intrusion patterns matched an internal executive access key. My head lifted immediately. Exhaustion vanished beneath adrenaline so fast it hurt. Someone inside Moretti Global helped them. Adrian nodded once. "We are narrowing the source now." I swallowed hard. That explained too much. The attackers adapting too quickly. The firewall responses. The timing. "You have a mole." Adrian's pale eyes stayed fixed on me carefully. "And whoever it is knows you identified them." Cold spread slowly through my chest. "That is why they traced my shadow connection." "Yes." Rain battered harder against the windows as silence settled over the room again. Somewhere downstairs, an ambulance siren echoed through the city streets. I looked away first because suddenly the hospital room felt smaller than before. Then I should leave. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. "No, if they know I am here, you are safer here than anywhere else in Manhattan tonight." His voice stayed calm, but steel hid underneath every word now. "I already doubled private security on this floor." I blinked slowly. "You stationed guards outside my hospital room?" "Yes." Something about the absolute certainty in his tone made my pulse stumble unexpectedly. Adrian leaned forward slightly, forearms resting against his knees. "Claire, listen carefully to me." The room seemed quieter after that sentence. Even the storm outside felt distant suddenly. "You spent 2 days protecting people who would never even know your name." His gaze locked onto mine with frightening intensity. "Now I protect you." My throat tightened painfully because nobody had ever said something like that to me before. Not seriously. Not like a promise. I looked down quickly before he could see emotion crossing my face. "You do not owe me anything." Adrian gave a quiet humorless laugh. "That is where you are wrong." I forced myself to breathe evenly while the heart monitor betrayed me beside the bed with every uneven beat. "You fired me." The words came out softer than I intended. Adrian went completely still after that. Regret moved across his face slowly, almost painfully. "I know. You looked at me like I failed you." "I failed you first." That silence afterward hurt worse than any argument could have. Because deep down, part of me had wanted him to notice before everything broke. The overtime. The exhaustion. The way my hands shook near the end. But people only notice foundations when buildings start collapsing. Adrian stood slowly from the chair beside the window and walked toward the bed until he stopped just beside me. Close enough that I could smell rain and expensive cedar cologne lingering faintly against his shirt. "Claire." His voice dropped lower this time. More personal somehow. "You should have never carried that alone." I stared at my bruised hands resting against the blanket while tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Then quietly, before I could stop myself, I whispered the truth that had lived inside me for years. Nobody ever stays long enough to help. Adrian did not answer immediately. He simply reached over and pulled the chair beside my bed closer instead of farther away. Then he sat back down beside me like leaving was no longer an option. By 4 in the morning, the storm over Manhattan had turned the city into a reflection of itself. Streets shimmered black beneath rainwater and neon lights while distant thunder rolled between skyscrapers like something restless moving through the dark. Inside the hospital room, the world had narrowed down to monitor beeps, glowing screens, and the quiet exhaustion sitting between Adrian and me. I should have been sleeping. Instead, I sat cross-legged against stiff hospital pillows with a borrowed laptop balanced carefully on my knees while lines of encrypted traffic crawled across the screen. Adrian stood near the window taking another low phone call in Italian, his voice calm in the way dangerous men became calm before decisions. Every few minutes, one of his security people entered quietly with updates before disappearing again. The entire hospital floor felt locked down now. I noticed 2 men in dark suits outside my door each time it opened. Not bodyguards exactly. More like walls that could move. Adrian ended the call and crossed back toward me just as another warning flashed across the screen. My stomach tightened instantly. They are inside again. Adrian stopped beside the bed. How bad? I enlarged the network trace with trembling fingers. This is not another breach attempt. My heartbeat sped painfully as the realization formed. They are wiping evidence. Adrian's expression sharpened immediately. The mole. I nodded once. Someone inside Moretti Global realized the attack failed. Outside the rain battered harder against the windows while emergency lights flickered faintly across neighboring rooftops downtown. Somewhere in the city, somebody was panicking. I typed another command carefully while trying to ignore the ache behind my eyes. The screen populated with internal access records, encrypted executive credentials, and hidden server requests buried beneath layers of fake traffic. Adrian leaned closer beside me, one hand braced lightly against the edge of the hospital bed. Heat radiated from him unexpectedly close. Can you trace it? Maybe. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. If they realize we found them, they will erase everything. Adrian's voice dropped lower. Then do it quietly. I glanced sideways at him. You trust me again? Something unreadable moved briefly across his face. Claire. He said my name carefully now. Like something valuable he nearly lost once already. I trust you more than anyone in that building. The words landed somewhere deep inside me before I could stop them. I looked back down at the screen too quickly. Dangerous. That was dangerous. My pulse stayed uneven while I rerouted the trace manually through a hidden server architecture only I knew existed. Across the room, lightning illuminated the windows in silver flashes. Then suddenly a single executive credential appeared highlighted in red. Adrian saw the name at the exact same moment I did. Vincent Hale. Chief Operations Officer. Silence filled the room instantly. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Vincent had worked beside Adrian for almost 10 years. Publicly loyal. Impossibly polished. The kind of executive investors trusted immediately. Adrian's face went completely still beside me. Somehow that frightened me more than anger would have. He sold access to the attackers, I whispered. Adrian said nothing. His pale eyes remained fixed on the screen while rain slid down the windows behind him in long silver streaks. Finally he asked quietly, "Can you prove it?" I swallowed hard and opened another encrypted folder hidden beneath the attack logs. My exhaustion vanished beneath pure adrenaline. Yes. The evidence unfolded piece by piece after that. Offshore transfers. Hidden server permissions. Internal firewall overrides timed perfectly with each cyber attack wave. Vincent Hale had not just helped them. He built the doorway himself. Adrian lowered his head briefly like a man absorbing betrayal somewhere physical inside his chest. I brought him into my company, he said quietly. I trusted him. I stared at the exhausted billionaire standing beside a hospital bed at dawn while Manhattan flickered weakly beyond the rainstorm. For the first time since meeting Adrian Moretti, he did not look powerful. He looked disappointed in himself. People betray systems the same way they betray people, I said softly before thinking. Adrian looked at me immediately. How? They search for the part nobody protects enough. Something shifted behind his eyes after that sentence. Slow realization. Sharp regret. Because suddenly he understood the real reason Moretti Global nearly collapsed. Not because hackers were stronger. Because the wrong people were valued while the right ones were left alone until they broke. Another security alert flashed suddenly across the screen. Remote wipe protocol initiated. Vincent had realized somebody found the evidence. He is trying to erase everything, I warned. Adrian reached for his phone instantly. Lock down every executive terminal, he ordered coldly the second someone answered. Nobody leaves the building. Then he looked back at me beside the glowing laptop screen, rain light reflecting across both our faces. Claire. His voice softened again unexpectedly. Help me finish this. Morning arrived slowly over Manhattan like the city itself was exhausted. Rain still clung to the windows of the hospital room in thin silver trails while pale sunrise pushed weakly through the clouds above the skyline. Somewhere downtown, power grids stabilized one block at a time. Banking systems came back online. Traffic lights stopped flickering. The city was breathing again. I sat quietly beside the glowing laptop with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders while the final recovery scripts finished running across the screen. Every muscle in my body ached now that adrenaline had finally started fading. Across the room, Adrian stood near the window with his phone pressed against his ear, giving calm instructions in that cold controlled voice that made powerful men move quickly. Freeze every executive account connected to Hale, he said flatly. Legal will handle the rest. He listened silently for a moment before adding, and terminate every senior manager who ignored the emergency escalation requests this week. His gaze shifted toward me briefly after that sentence. Starting this morning. He ended the call and lowered the phone slowly while dawn light painted pale gold across the sharp lines of his face. Somehow the room felt quieter now that the crisis was ending. More dangerous too. Because emergencies leave no room for feelings. Recovery does. I closed the laptop carefully once the final security confirmation appeared across the screen. System stable. Threat contained. 48 hours of fear, exhaustion, and silence reduced to one calm line of text. My hands trembled afterward anyway. Adrian noticed immediately. He crossed the room without speaking and gently slid the laptop away from my grip before I accidentally dropped it. Enough, he said quietly. You are done. I stared down at my bruised fingers resting against the blanket. Tiny cuts still marked my skin from endless hours against overheated keys and rough desk edges. The city is online again. Yes. Relief hit me slowly this time. Softer than before. The kind that left you empty afterward instead of triumphant. I leaned back against the hospital pillows and closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere in the hallway outside, nurses laughed quietly during shift change. Coffee carts rolled past. Life continued normally for everyone who never knew how close things came to collapsing. Adrian remained standing beside the bed watching me with an expression I still did not fully understand. Not guilt anymore. Something heavier. What? I asked softly without opening my eyes. Silence stretched for a second before he answered. I spent years believing loyalty came from fear. I looked up slowly. Morning light softened the cold edges of his face now, but not enough to hide the exhaustion behind his eyes. That sounds lonely. A quiet almost smile touched his mouth briefly. It is. I studied him carefully then. The billionaire everyone feared. The man executives obeyed without hesitation. The man who could shut down entire companies with one phone call. And somehow, beneath all of that power, he looked more tired than I felt. Adrian glanced toward the city skyline outside before speaking again. You saved Moretti Global. I shook my head weakly. I saved innocent people from losing everything. His eyes returned to mine immediately after that answer. Something vulnerable moved across his expression before he buried it again. That is exactly why the company needs someone like you. I looked away toward the rain-streaked windows because compliments still felt unfamiliar against my skin. Adrian reached into his jacket slowly and placed a black security badge beside the bed. New. Untouched. My name printed beneath a silver executive clearance stripe. I stared at it in silence. Chief Director of Cybersecurity, Adrian said quietly. Full authority. Full control over the department. Direct access only through me. My throat tightened unexpectedly. You are offering me a promotion. I am offering you the position you should have had long before this happened. The room went silent again except for distant thunder fading somewhere beyond the skyline. I looked down at the badge for a long moment before gently pushing it back toward him. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. Not anger. Confusion. Claire. I met his eyes carefully. I did not stay because I wanted power. He went still. Then why did you stay? Outside the windows, sunlight finally broke weakly through the storm clouds above Manhattan. Gold light spilled across the room, across the hospital bed, across the exhausted man standing beside it. I swallowed once before answering honestly. Because somebody had to care enough not to walk away. Adrian stared at me silently after that. Long enough that my heartbeat started betraying me again beneath the monitor wires. Then finally, very quietly, he asked, and if I asked you not to walk away? From me now? The question settled between us softer than the storm ever had. I looked toward the waking city beyond the glass where millions of strangers moved through a morning they would never realize almost disappeared overnight. Then I looked back at the man who ruled half of it and saw something unexpected beneath all the power and control. Not a mafia boss. Not a billionaire. Just a man learning too late that empires survive because invisible people choose to hold them together. And for the first time since this began, Adrian Moretti waited for an answer instead of demanding one.